Last time, we looked at Valdor, the Captain General, Protector of the Emperor, and one of humanity's deadliest warriors. And now, we're turning our attention to the other member of the Triumvirate, Malcador the Sigillite. Easily, one of the most dangerous psychers in the entire 40K universe. Welcome back to another edition of Powerscaling Peeps. Today, we're taking a look at Malcador, exploring his feats, his powers, and asking the ultimate question: could this old man actually take on a Primarch? This marks the beginning of a brand new series I plan to continue well into the future, where we'll examine powerful characters from across the 40K universe and debate whether they could kill a Primarch. Next up, we'll tackle Ghazghkull Thraka, and we'll most likely see appearances from Luthor, Catan Shards, Necron Overlords, and many more terrifying figures in this series. Here's how things are going to work today though. We'll break down who Malcador is, explore his feats and powers, see if he could beat a base Primarch, and finally evaluate how he stacks up against various other forms of Primarchs, including Demon Primarchs, Corrupted War Masters, and older Loyalists. Make your bets, people. Make your bets. Because as always, it's power scaling time. So who exactly is Malcador the Sigillite? Well, that's the thing. Nobody really knows for sure. His true origins are surrounded in mystery, known only to the Emperor himself. What we do know is that Malcador claimed to be over 6,000 years old during the Horus heresy, and in fact was one of the last survivors of an ancient order called the Sigillites, dedicated to collecting and preserving humanity's greatest artifacts. He eventually became the Emperor's closest confidant, advisor, and administrator during the Unification Wars, aiding him in his mission to finally unite Terra and eventually launch the Great Crusade. But Mr. Malcador was far more than a bureaucrat. He created the Inquisition, handpicked the first Knights Errant who would go on to become the Grey Knights, and secretly served as Master of Assassins, making multiple attempts on Horus Lupercal's life. Throughout the heresy, he even served as the Emperor's voice as he labored on the Golden Throne. When the Siege of Terra reached its climax, Malcador willingly took the Emperor's place upon the Golden Throne, an act that burned his body to dust and shattered his very soul. But he survived long enough for the final confrontation between the Emperor and Horus to take place. It was his last and greatest sacrifice, earning him the title Malcador the Hero. But before we jump into Malcador's powers and feats, there's something we need to discuss first. Something that explains how he could live for a millennium, endure the warp, shape the fate of mankind, and become as powerful as he is. To truly understand Malcador, we first need to understand what it means to be a perpetual, and why that might be the true key to his strength. So what is a perpetual? In Warhammer 40K, a perpetual is someone who just doesn't die. They've got an insanely accelerated healing factor, and if they do get killed, they eventually resurrect. Their souls snap back into their bodies no matter what happens, making them truly immortal. They can walk through a millennium, gathering knowledge, surviving disasters, and shaping events in a galaxy that chews most mortals up in minutes. The only known way to kill them for good is with something like a fulgurite, a shard of the Emperor's own power, or with a giant golden toilet that sucks your soul out. So why does this matter for Malcador? It means he was effectively immortal, able to regenerate from wounds, endure fatal injuries, and come back even if he was killed. That gave him the time and freedom to accumulate impossible amounts of knowledge and experience across thousands of years. In other words, Malcador wielded near unparalleled psychic mastery, and immortality was only part of the equation. Being a perpetual allowed Malcador to endure and thrive long enough to become one of the most powerful psychers in the entire 40K universe. And that brings us to the real question: what were his powers and feats? First things first, like I just stated, Malcador was an insanely powerful psyker. In fact, he's ranked as the third strongest in the galaxy, only behind the Emperor himself and Magnus the Red. He had access to virtually every psychic ability you could imagine. Let's break them all down, starting with telepathy, which let Malcador read minds, manipulate thoughts, and communicate across the galaxy. He could coordinate entire armies without speaking a word, influence decisions, or even probe the minds of demons and traitors to anticipate their moves. He had telekinesis, which made him a walking force of destruction. He could throw enemies, collapse buildings, deflect attacks, and manipulate massive objects in battle with ease. His third ability was illusions, allowing him to cloak entire battlefields, trick enemies into seeing things that weren't there, or mask his presence entirely. He even had invisibility, like a warp-powered Harry Potter cloak, allowing him to move hidden and undetected by both allies and enemies. His fifth psychic ability was enhanced perception, which meant Malcador could sense enemies before they act, read the battlefield in slow motion, and even detect hidden threats like spies or assassins before they struck. He could also manipulate the elements, summoning destructive energies from fire, lightning, or even raw warp storms to annihilate opponents, manipulate the environment, or control weather on a small scale. He even had reality manipulation, similar to Magnus, which allowed him to bend the laws of matter and energy around him, reshaping space, creating near impenetrable barriers, or even affecting the flow of time in limited ways to gain a tactical advantage. Holy shit, Mr. Malcador's got quite the arsenal of spells. I'm not even done yet, fellow cows. He also had astral projection, which let him leave his physical form and move unseen through the warp, spy on enemies, or influence events from beyond the material plane. And finally, like all powerful psychers in 40k, he had form manipulation, which allowed him to alter his very form to his advantage in both combat and strategy. But even someone like Malcador doesn't always use his full arsenal to its maximum potential. This is mostly a problem with 40k writing. Psyker abilities are repeatedly underwritten or nerfed, letting incredibly powerful figures like Magnus the Red or Malcador appear weaker than they logically should be. They're basically the galaxy's equivalent of a cheat code that the writers kinda forgot they had. For example, during the book Echoes of Eternity, during the Siege of Terra, Vulcan and Magnus the Red squared off in a fight in the webway. During this fight, Magnus the Red atomized Vulcan multiple times, and Vulcan only survived due to his perpetual nature. We never see Magnus doing this ever again throughout the setting, or any of his other wacky powerful psychic abilities. It's like the writers completely forgot who Magnus the Red is, and just decided to make him the biggest idiot in the galaxy. I mean, in what goddamn universe are you gonna get tricked by this guy? This guy of all people, Magnus? Come on.
Are you stupid or something?
But before I turn this video into a Magnus the Red rant, let's get back to Malcador and the next section we're going to be talking about, his weapons. First, his Archaeotech collar, strapped around his neck, could generate a devastating force field capable of redirecting enemy attacks right back at their source. Then there was his staff, which could unleash a wave of nuclear level fire. Yet Malcador himself insisted it was merely a tool, another reminder that his true weapon was always his own psychic might. And of course, he rocked a snazzy gray cloak that made him look like your local Grandmaster pimp, giving him that unmistakable mix of authority, menace, and style only a master of the Imperium could pull off. Now that we've covered Malcador's insane powers and his iconic gear, let's talk about some of his greatest feats. For starters, he concealed the Moon Titan within the warp and bent time around it so that when it re-emerged years later, the Grey Knights had over a century to establish their order. Wow, right off the bat, we already have Malcador casually tossing moons into the warp. Then of course, they're sitting on the Golden Throne, something only the Emperor and theoretically Magnus the Red could survive. I feel like most people don't truly grasp how massive of a feat this is. The individual on the throne is holding back an obscene number of demons, preventing them from spilling through the webway and destroying Terra. That alone speaks volumes about Malcador's raw psychic might and sheer resilience. Even the likes of Janetta Kroll, Lord Commander of the Sisters of Silence, who could nullify the warp and psychic powers around her, couldn't fully suppress him. At most, she made him feel tired, and even then, his warp-enhanced presence barely flickered. During the assault on White Mountain, Malcador demonstrated the ability to rewrite minds and even cast literal atomic-level psychic spells, incinerating thousands of enemy chaos worshippers effortlessly. Malcador far surpasses Urda, the third strongest perpetual, who herself killed 4 greater demons simultaneously, which puts Malcador's psychic potential into an almost incomprehensible league of its own. So how does this stack up against the Primarchs, beings who are essentially warp entities crammed into hyper-engineered mortal vessels? They possess super strength, speed, genius-level intellect, and in many cases, their own ties to the warp. Fortunately, this debate isn't just theoretical. Malcador has actually gone toe-to-toe with Primarchs in the established lore. He endured a strike from Lorgar after the burning of Monarchia, choked and threatened to unmake pre-heresy Horus, and even erased all knowledge of the 2nd and 11th Primarchs from their brothers' minds. Let's take a closer look at these showdowns and truly answer the question, could Malcador defeat a Primarch? First, let's look at Malcador's feat in the book First Heretic, where he tanks a blow from Lorgar and appears completely unfazed. For context, the Wordbearers had just been censored for their false worship of the Emperor, and the religious world of Monarchia lay in ruins. During this incident, an enraged Lorgar slapped Malcador 20 meters through the air with the back of his hand. But Malcador not only survived, he got up afterwards, seemingly uninjured. This incredible durability is likely tied to his immense psychic might, which could have allowed him to either absorb the force of the blow or heal from it almost instantly. The takeaway, even a direct strike from a Primarch isn't enough to fell Malcador. His psychic resilience keeps him composed and unfazed. The next remarkable feat comes from the Scions of the Emperor, where it's revealed that Malcador erased the memories of the 2nd and 11th lost Primarchs from the minds of all the other Primarchs. This demonstrates not only the reach of his power, but also suggests he can alter, suppress, or manipulate even the most resilient minds in the galaxy. But the centerpiece of his confrontation with the Primarchs is his brief yet intense clash with Horus Lubrical during the book The Last Council. Here, Malcador and Horus nearly come to blows over the deletion of the 2nd and 11th Primarchs. This confrontation is telling. It shows that even against the future War Master, Malcador's psychic abilities make him a serious threat. Here are my best Malcador, Horus Lubrical, Jekatite Gon, and Alfarius voices. My brothers, I have come to put an end to this madness once and for all. The history of the Imperium is not something that can be amended. We will not allow it. Pacing now around the other men and women in the chamber, Alfarius nodded in agreement. We know the price of destiny, Lord Regent. We know the sacrifices that must be made. There was always a chance that some of us would not live to see the galaxy united beneath our father's banner. He saluted with one fist to his chest, being sure to mark the Sigillite's reaction to the outdated gesture. But to deny they never existed, to openly dishonor the memory of our fallen brother, what gives you the right to decide that? In secret, behind closed doors? Malcador glared at him. Do not speak of secrets. You are playing a dangerous game, the three of you, and my patience grows thin. Quite unexpectedly, Horus laughed, loud and long. You can't even say it, can you? You can't even say his name. Do not speak it, Malcador thundered, loading the name with psychic force that struck the Primarch's mind like a hammer to the forehead. Horus reeled, blinking away the pain. His brothers, too, seemed to feel the blow along with every mortal still in the chamber. Even the Sigillite's own ears rang, but he kept his voice firm and unwavering. This was your father's command, boy, and you all agreed to it. To disobey now is to break faith with the Emperor himself. The Primarch gave a wary, defiant grin. My brother's name was? Faster than human thought, Malcador's empty hand snapped up into an arcane gesture long forgotten by any other living soul on Terra. Silence! Horus froze, his limbs locked fast with his armor. He shuddered uncontrollably, pressure building in his muscles as he fought against it. Slowly, Malcador stood, holding the Primarch in place with the power of his mind and nothing more. The Khan sprang towards the center of the room. Lord Regent, he urged, holding out his open hands. You must release him, please. He speaks from grief and the shame we all share. The air between them thrummed with invisible energy. Malcador could still see that hateful, defiant pride shining through Horus's gaze. You are not ready for the future, Crave, he hissed. None of you are. He forced Horus down on his knees. The stricken Primarch choked. The The Sigillite's face twisted into a vengeful rictus. He felt the old, familiar rage beginning to stir, deep in his undying soul. Enough. You will be silent, or I will unmake you here and now. Horus's windpipe closed with a sickly crackle. His right eye bloomed red as a blood vessel burst, but still, he would not relent. So defiant, so ungrateful. Alfarius took an uncertain step back. Stop, Lord Regent, stop. You will kill him. Tiny crawling motes of light began to creep into the edges of Malcador's vision. He could feel heat building within his ancient bones, stinging at the meat of his flesh. The stench of burning hair rose in his nostrils. Sigillite! Bellowed the Khan, and in an instant, it was over. Malcador released Horus. The Primarch crashed the tiled floor, convulsing, almost gagging, on rough lungfuls of air. Alfarius rushed to his side. Breathe, brother. Just breathe. I hope you guys enjoyed those voices, especially the Malcador one. Kinda sounds like Dumbledore if he smoked too many cigarettes. Let's dissect this excerpt. First off, this is an insane feat that truly shows what Malcador is capable of. We see him use his powers to such an extent that he can overpower Primarch, reacting faster than human thought, and unleashing a psychic gesture that restrains Horus, slowly choking him and even forcing him to his knees. The craziest part? Alfarius has to step in, warning Malcador that he will kill Horus if he continues. At this point, Horus is completely out of his depth, unable to free himself, and entirely at the mercy of the Sigillite. In summary, Malcador demonstrates psychic mastery over Horus and could have killed him if he had chosen to. Quite the gosh darn feat. But hold on. I haven't made my final judgment yet.
What?
I know some of you are thinking, Cow, it's over. This excerpt proves it. But there are a few feats that show that Malcador isn't all-powerful against the Primarchs. The first occurs during the Siege of Terra when Malcador attempts to revive Jagatai Khan after his near-fatal encounter with Mortarion. After several unsuccessful attempts, it's the Emperor, acting through Malcador, who saves the Khan, showing that the region of Terra can't fully control the life and death of the Primarchs. An even bigger limitation occurs in Fury of Magnus. During the Siege of Terra, Magnus the Red infiltrates the Imperial Palace and encounters Malcador. In a fit of rage, Magnus accidentally incinerates Malcador without even focusing his power. And Malcador, well, he seems completely unable to defend himself. He may have been caught off guard, but the feat stands. Even the Sigillite can't withstand the raw, unrestrained power of certain Primarchs. With these feats laid out, it's now time for everyone's favorite part of the video. It's time for Malcador to run the Primarch gauntlet.
Woo! Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for. That's what it's all about. Woo!
Just like last video, we'll be putting the Primarchs into 3 distinct power scales using the famous power pyramid to see exactly how the Sigillite measures up against the galaxy's most degenerate space babies. So we have low tier Primarch, mid tier Primarch, and high tier Primarch. In low tier Primarch, we have Lorgar, Alfarius Omegon, Guilliman, Perturabo, and Mortarion. In mid tier Primarch, we have Ferrus Manus, Horus Lubrical, Corvus Corax, Rogel Dorn, Vulcan, and Jagatai Khan. And in high tier Primarch, we have Leman Russ, Fulgrim, Angron, Conrad Kurz, the Lion, Sanguinius, and Magnus the Red. A couple of notes before we dive in. I repositioned a few of the Primarchs within the tiers, specifically Ferrus Manus and Jagatai Khan. I still believe their relative strength hasn't changed. Ferrus Manus simply fits better in mid tier, while the Khan is borderline high tier, but the Primarchs ahead of him are just simply stronger. I'm sorry, White Scar fans. I had to do it. Remember, these are all base Primarchs, each of them as they were during the Great Crusade, before Corruption, Ascension, or any other new abilities. This gives us a solid baseline to compare against. One other thing to keep in mind, from what we've seen, Primarchs with psychic abilities tend to have an advantage against Malcador, as demonstrated by Magnus the Red, who essentially deleted him on accident. That said, let's kick things off with the low tier Primarchs. So once again, the low tier Primarchs are made up of Lorgar, Alfarius, Guilliman, Perturabo, and Mortarion. This is honestly easy work for Malcador.
That was easy.
If Horus, who in my eyes sits comfortably above these 5, and he could be restrained, choked, and forced to his knees, whoa, kinda kinky. Then by power scaling logic, Malcador should be able to replicate the same against this whole tier. Lorgar even managed to land a strike on him once, yet Malcador brushed it off without a scratch, showing that even direct hits from these Primarchs mean next to nothing against him. If they tried to fight, the outcome would be the same every time. Malcador ends it swiftly. He could crush Guilliman's disciplined mind with a single psychic spike, lock Alfarius' body in place while tearing through his brain of secrets, drown Perturabo in unsolvable calculations until his mind fries, or suffocate Mortarion's lungs with warp-forged poisons before the Death Lord could even raise his scythe. And as for Lorgar, base Lorgar would get flattened. Malcador could pin him down with nothing more than a look and grind the preacher boy into a marble-like sermon gone wrong. All of the low-tier Primarchs are low-difficulty fights, but Lorgar is the only one amongst them who might actually make things interesting. I know some of you are shocked like Pikachu right now, but remember, in the Horus Heresy, Lorgar gets quite the amp. His own Psychic Awakening. Let's quickly evaluate this form of Lorgar, Psyker Awakened Lorgar, who is no joke. He can toss Space Marines around like toys, deflect blasts from a Warhound Titan, and has a tiny bit of knowledge on Annuncia for various effects including healing. That's a serious power boost, and it does make him more dangerous than his base form. So how would he do against Malcador? Even this amp form of Lorgar likely still loses. While his abilities make the fight more interesting, possibly moving it into mid-difficulty, he still lacks the raw power and the deep knowledge needed to outmaneuver the Sigillite. Malcador's power, experience, and innate understanding of the warp make him an expert at countering and neutralizing powers like Annuncia. So yes, Annuncia complicates things, but it's unlikely to tip the scales in Lorgar's favor. Malcador's mastery of psychic combat keeps him firmly in control, making this a mid-diff fight. Moving on, we hit the mid-tier Primarchs. Ferrus Manus, Horus Lupercal, Corvus Corax, Rogel Dorn, Vulcan, and Jagatai Khan. These fights would definitely be trickier than the low-tier group, but Malcador still has the edge. Ferrus Manus' iron arms are impressive, but they're utterly useless against the ethereal powers of the warp. Malcador could boil his brain until even the Gorgon himself gives up. Base form Horus we've already seen in action, choked and nearly broken. Malcador could replicate that over and over without issue. Corvus Corax's shadow slipping might make him slippery, but Malcador's psychic precognition ensures he always senses and counters the emo bird boy before any killing blow lands. Rogel Dorn, the Imperial Praetorian, possesses immense mental fortitude and sheer willpower, and his ability to anchor himself in the warp makes for a fascinating contest. But even he is not fully immune to psychic attacks, as demonstrated when Zardu Lyak nuked himself and temporarily incapacitated Dorn, showing his defenses have limits. Malcador, who scales far above Zardu, would effortlessly annihilate Dorn in his stubborn resolve. Jagatai Khan is one of the more deadlier opponents for any Psyker. His speed allows him to blitz anyone before spells could be cast. Yet, as we saw with Horus, Malcador reacts faster than thought itself, his counters rebounding every strike the speedy Khan throws at him, ultimately resulting in Malcador crushing the Khan. And finally, we have Vulcan, a perpetual himself who is a nightmare to kill. He gave Demon Primarch Magnus a headache, though, let's be honest, the writers nerfed Magnus by having him kill Vulcan over and over again, despite knowing that Vulcan is unkillable. What? But to be honest, Malcador would still emerge victorious in this fight. Although it would be a tougher victory, Malcador is a perpetual himself, and with that knowledge, he knows exactly how to kill another one. The mid-tier group overall is low to mid difficulty depending on the matchup. None of them have the psychic dominance to break Malcador's grip except for the various corrupted forms of Horus Lupercal. And don't worry folks, we'll be scaling him against Malcador later. As for the rest of the mid-tier group, the only real what-ifs are the Khan's sheer speed and Vulcan's unkillable body. Everyone else, they'd fold. Up next, the high-tier Primarchs. Leman Russ, Fulgrim, Angron, Conrad Kurz, the Lion, Sanguinius, and Magnus the Red. This is where things get tough for the old man. The high-tier Primarchs are some of the Emperor's most powerful sons, and while Malcador is an Alpha Plus Psyker, there are no pushovers. Let's start with his easier opponents, Angron and Fulgrim, and when I say easier, I don't mean easy. It will still be a pretty difficult fight. Angron's sheer brute force, berserker rage, and sheer refusal to quit could let him push through the pain and close the distance, while Fulgrim's speed, grace, and duelist instincts mirror some of the Khan's advantages. Both would make him work for it, but neither has the right toolkit to consistently deal with the full weight of Malcador's warp dominance. In their base forms, they just don't have the versatility to stop him. But then, we come to the Lion, Conrad Kurz, and Sanguinius. These three are genuine problems. The Lion in his base form seemed to display some natural resistance to the warp itself, meaning Malcador's psychic grip wouldn't crush him as effortlessly as others. Kurz and Sanguinius, on the other hand, both have precognition and latent psychic sensitivity, giving them the ability to anticipate and resist Malcador's strikes before he even makes them. They'd be able to react in ways other Primarchs couldn't, creating prolonged battles where Malcador's advantage isn't absolute. Ultimately though, I think all three would fall in time. Malcador's mastery and raw force would eventually overwhelm them, but it would be a highly difficult fight that would leave Malcador utterly exhausted and near death. Now let's talk about the two real headaches, Leman Russ and Magnus the Red. I know some people are losing their shit right now, but come on guys, hear me out. Leman Russ is an interesting fella. On the surface, he's not a psyker on Magnus's level, but he has some great abilities. Outside of his infamous Psychic Scream, which can stagger psykers across the battlefield and in some cases flat out kill them, Russ seems to wield control over elemental storms. Coupled with his wolfen genes, he carries a natural resistance to the warp that makes him uniquely hard to pin down with psychic assaults. And you suddenly see how much of a nightmare Leman Russ could be for Malcador. His Psychic Scream alone is designed to stun and cripple psykers, cutting them off from their powers long enough for Russ to close the gap and unleash pure savage brutality. Malcador, of course, isn't helpless. He can raise shields, bind Russ in place telepathically, and perhaps most importantly, read Russ's intent before the Wolf King even makes a move. But this is one of the few fights where Malcador can't afford to slip up for even a moment. If Russ gets close, it's over. So this fight is a true toss-up. Russ has the perfect anti-psyker kit and has the feral savagery to capitalize on it. But if Malcador keeps his distance, maintains pressure, and never lets him close the gap, the Sigillite walks away the victor. This is one of the rare cases where we don't know if Malcador would emerge the victor. And if he did, he would either be immensely injured or would have to use his perpetual powers to resurrect from the dead. And then there's Magnus the Red, the psychic god among mortals, and on paper, this matchup looks simple. Magnus has more raw warp power than anyone but the Emperor himself. He's the storm made flesh, the architect of Prospero's libraries, and his psychic strength can obliterate armies, worlds, or reality itself. During the Siege of Terra, in a fit of rage, Magnus incinerated Malcador without even trying, seemingly proving the gap between them. But context matters. Malcador was caught off guard, unprepared, and far from fighting at full capacity. So what happens if they met as equals, both primed for war? This is peak power scaling, fellas. Between psykers, raw strength alone doesn't decide the battle. Knowledge, subtlety, and psychic finesse matter just as much. And Malcador, more than any being save the Emperor, embodies that mastery. His weapons are deception, deflection, and forbidden lore that Magnus never even dreamed existed. Magnus, for all his brilliance, often defaults to brute force, telekinetic blasts, psychic storms, and firepower measured in apocalyptic scales. Malcador's strength lies in precision, turning that force aside, baiting Magnus into overextending, and twisting his raw strength against him with a trap buried in layers of warp trickery. So there are two possible scenarios here. One where Malcador doesn't have prep time, and one where he does. Random note, but this sounds a lot like DC power scaling. I don't know if you guys are in those communities like your favorite Falling Cow, but prep time is mentioned a lot with Batman, and everyone claims Batman can beat anyone with prep time, which is simply untrue. But I guess we're doing the same thing here. Malcador with and without prep time against Magnus the Red. So without prep time, Malcador and Magnus's fight would turn into a battle of pure raw strength, which of course Magnus would win. He simply has too much raw power, and even Malcador's mastery would collapse under sustained pressure. It would be a mid to highly difficult win for Magnus, but a win nonetheless. And then the other scenario, with Malcador having prep time, it would be a battle of wits and subtlety. With traps and misdirection, Malcador could absolutely take this. He wouldn't crush Magnus head on, he'd bleed him dry by turning his own power back on him, until the Crimson King falls to his own hubris. This scenario would still be highly difficult for Malcador, since Magnus the Red is literally a walking unit when it comes to psychic abilities, meaning Malcador would have to use every single trick in the book to combat Magnus the Red and attempt to defeat him through precise warp abilities and trickery. So what's the final verdict? So altogether, Malcador can outright defeat nearly all of the Primarchs except for Leman Russ, who remains a toss-up, and Magnus, who depending on the circumstances, could simply out-psyker the Sigillite. Before we move on to the various other forms of psychers, I want to remind everyone, Malcador is a perpetual. Psychic blows won't harm him. He would just simply heal or return eventually. This means that for Malcador to truly be in danger, his opponent must either possess strong resistance to the warp or wield significant psychic abilities of their own. Now it's time for the bonus round. We're throwing him against the Demon Primarchs, the Bald Menace himself, Horus Lubercal, in all his various forms, and the current versions of the Loyalist Primarchs. Let's start with the Demon Primarchs, the fallen, degenerate Chaos Boys. So since Malcador beat most of the base Primarchs, including almost all of the traitor Primarchs except for Magnus the Red, he could easily defeat the Demon Primarchs, right? Right guys, right?
You serious?
Once a Primarch ascends to demonhood, they become warp-empowered avatars with abilities far beyond what Malcador can consistently counter. While Malcador might seem like the ideal opponent for a single powerful psyker, the Demon Primarchs are now fully equipped to handle him. Their ascension grants them immense warp-powered defenses and offensive power, allowing them to strike back against psychic attacks that would devastate lesser opponents. Lorgar, as the ascended Demon Prince of Chaos Undivided, isn't the same weakling we clowned earlier. Now he commands Enuncia, twisted psychic powers, and packs enhanced strength, speed, agility, flight, and regeneration. Malcador could try every trick in his book, but Lorgar's full kit of abilities would overwhelm him both physically and psychically. Mortarion, bloated with the gifts of Nurgle, has become a psychic master of decay on top of all the usual demon buffs. His durability is obscene, so much that even the Emperor-possessed Guilliman is one of the few beings who could really challenge him. Malcador's warp mastery is impressive, but against Mortarion's resilience and that choking aura of corruption, the Sigillite doesn't stand a chance. Perturabo ascends as an avatar of all 4 Chaos Gods, and his durability is on another level entirely. The fact that he can withstand Mortarion's decay aura says it all. If Mortarion can't rot him, Malcador sure as hell can't break him. Perturabo would simply tank the psychic assault, and then due to his genius intellect, would have crafted a chaos weapon capable of destroying Malcador and halting his perpetual powers. Fulgrim is a nastier case than many give him credit for. Not only does demonhood grant him the usual chaos buffs like regeneration, durability, and enhanced strength, but he's also awakened psychic abilities of his own, strong enough to annihilate a titan. Combine that with his speed and duelist mastery, and Fulgrim becomes an absolute nightmare for Malcador to face. Even if the Sigillite can counter his psychic side, Fulgrim's sheer quickness and surgical precision in combat would let him carve through Malcador before he could execute any clever warp tricks. Angron's demon form is the easiest call of the bunch. Already a physical monster, now he's got warp resistance to boot. The kind of psychic finesse Malcador specializes in doesn't even land on Demon Primarch Angron. One Berserker charge later, and the Sigillite is red mist. And then there's Magnus the Red. As if he wasn't already the undisputed psychic powerhouse of the Primarchs, demonhood pushes him even further into godhood. His raw warp potential is on a scale Malcador simply can't match. A straight up duel between them is a one-sided execution. Once the Primarchs ascend to demonhood, Malcador's psychic might doesn't cut it anymore. These guys are warp-fused juggernauts, resistant to psychic attacks, physically unstoppable, and armed with reality-warping powers of their own. Against them, the Sigillite isn't the predator, he's the prey. We're not just talking about the Demon Primarchs though. We're also bringing in the Bald Menace himself, Horus Lubercal. By the end of the heresy, Horus is the strongest Primarch by far. At his peak, he's stronger than even the Emperor. and arguably one of the most powerful beings the 40k universe has ever seen. Over the course of the heresy, Horus evolves like a goddamn Pokemon, going from a smug bald warlord to the literal master of evil. In my view, his evolutionary chain has 5 distinct forms. First, base or Great Crusade Horus. This Horus we already evaluated. He has no chaos buffs, no warp powers, just a normal rinky-dink Primarch with nothing supernatural added in, except for baldness. Second is post-Daemon Horus. After being saved by the ruinous powers, Horus gets his first taste of chaos corruption. At this stage, his abilities are only slightly enhanced. He's still roughly the same Primarch, just meaner, nastier, and with a little extra warp juice in the tank. Third is post-Molech Horus. This is the first major leap. Horus enters the same Molech portal the Emperor had centuries earlier, the very place where Big E stole power from the Chaos Gods to create the Primarchs. Horus does the same thing, but instead of skimming off the top like Dad, he drinks a little too deep. He emerges vastly empowered, now one of the top 3 strongest Primarchs with newly unlocked psychic abilities and heavy chaos buffs. The only drawback, half of his soul is still trapped in the warp, limiting his full potential. Fourth is Slaves to Darkness Horus. After the events of Slaves to Darkness, Horus's soul is finally recombined and his power level skyrockets. This is the form where he ragdolls Lorgar, flexes his full psychic arsenal, and is so infused with the powers of the warp that his form is constantly changing for those around him. A trait that is shared with the other powerful psychers in the setting, like Malcador, the Emperor, and Magnus. He is without a doubt the strongest Primarch, and may even now rival Big E. And finally, we have the 5th form of Horus Lubrical, God Emperor Horus. This is peak Horus. By now, he has full control over his warp-born abilities. He can rewrite reality, manipulate time and space, regenerate from basically anything, and wield powers so vast that the Emperor himself was going to ascend to the 5th Chaos God to even challenge him. At this point, Horus is effectively a god walking the material realm. Jesus Christ. So let's run Malcador through this gauntlet, form by form, and see just how long the Sigillite can last against Pokemon champion Horus Lubrical. In my opinion, Malcador can comfortably take base Horus and most likely post-Daemon Horus as well. Since at that stage, Horus hasn't really gained any meaningful psychic abilities, he's just stronger, meaner, and nastier. Malcador's sheer warp dominance is more than enough to handle him. But then we hit post-Molech Horus, and this is where things get a little dicey for Malcador. This form of Horus steps into the same portal the Emperor once used, but pushes it even further. Although he still has half of his soul trapped in the warp, he emerges vastly empowered. His raw warp power, psychic resistance, and physical strength all skyrocketing to a new level. And luckily for me, and I guess you guys, we've got a really good benchmark for this form of Horus, and it's his duel with Leman Russ. And let me be really clear right off the bat, Russ got absolutely bodied.
Give my fucking hat. Damn!
Now I know there are some Space Wolf fans out there typing, "Dude, cow, he beat Horus. Come on, dude, come on." No, he simply didn't. He only managed to wound Horus because he had the Spear of Russ, the ultimate anti-chaos weapon. That spear bypassed Horus's chaos buffs, drained him of his power, and let Russ land a crippling blow. Without that spear, Russ would have been paced. But don't get me wrong, Leman Russ is not weak. The fact that he fought a heavily corrupted Horus at all and lived long enough to stab him is a pretty insane feat. But it proves the point that post-Molech Horus is simply on another level. If I'm being honest, I think post-Molech Horus is stronger than everyone except Magnus the Red and Sanguinius. And if that's the case, Malcador does not win this fight. He pushes Horus hard, maybe even forces a highly difficult battle, but in the end, the bald menace is just too juiced up with chaos powers. And from there, well, Slaves to Darkness Horus and God Emperor Horus don't even need an analysis. They'd wipe Malcador off the board in seconds. There's just no competition at that stage. Horus has evolved past anything the Sigillite can realistically handle. Finally, let's review Malcador's chances against the modern-day, post-heresy Loyalist Primarchs. Warp Shadow, Corvus Corax, Knight of Nihilus, Lionel Johnson, and Lord Commander Rabute Guilliman. Starting with Guilliman, nothing much has changed, to be honest. Even with the Emperor's Sword and all the experience he's gained post-heresy, Guilliman is still no match for Malcador. Psychic duels are simply beyond him, and Malcador could lock him down before the sword ever swings. Verdict: Guilliman loses, low difficulty. Now, Corvus Corax. This is a completely different story. Fully embracing his warp gifts, Corax has become a living shadow, able to shapeshift into puddles, a flock of ravens, or even a gigantic, towering shadow beast. These forms would allow him to completely evade Malcador's psychic binds, precognition, and telekinetic attacks. He can blitz, reform, and overwhelm Malcador in many ways that the Sigillite has no real counter to. In close quarters or even at range, Corax's warp-enhanced mobility lets him strike lethally while avoiding nearly all retaliation. Verdict: Corax wins decisively. And finally, there's Lionel Johnson. While not as dramatically altered as Corax, the Lion now possesses his own warp-enhanced ability, Forest Walk, and he is also fortified by the Emperor's Shield. This shield is implied to be able to block both physical and psychic attacks, possibly allowing him to shrug off much of Malcador's arsenal while maneuvering and striking back. Combined with his strategic movement and Forest Walk, the Lion becomes extremely difficult to pin down or exploit. Over time, he could outlast the Sigillite and deliver a decisive blow. Verdict: Lion vs Malcador is razor close, but the Lion likely emerges the victor. So in summary, Malcador can confidently overcome most of the base Primarchs, with exceptions being Magnus and Leman Russ. However, once he faces the Demon Primarchs, post-Molech Horus, and the current Loyalist Primarchs, with the notable exception being Mr. Girlyman, it's game over. The Sigillite simply doesn't have the raw might, warp resistance, or psychic firepower to contend with these warp-empowered, physically enhanced, and psychically gifted opponents. His mastery, subtlety, and precognition aren't enough to secure the victory. So there you have it. If you enjoyed this breakdown, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. You'll get access to bonus content, behind-the-scenes updates, and even the chance to vote on what videos I make next. I want to give a massive shout out to my incredible Patreon supporters and YouTube members. Your support gives me the time and energy to break down these crazy power scaling videos and wild hypotheticals. For this video, I'm shouting out Ryania Basket, Omar, Ritter S, Soft Use, Keydree, and William Strong. You legends keep this channel going. Thank you for keeping me milked and motivated. So what do we have planned for the next couple weeks? Well, I absolutely grinded, and I think I'll be able to get out the part 2 to who is the strongest Space Marine in each chapter. I know this is a highly requested video, so I hope I can get it out within the next week. After that, we'll cover how powerful the Dark King is, and then later, we'll run the Primarch Gauntlet again with none other than Ghazghkull Thraka himself. Can the Prophet of the Wog survive against the Emperor's sons? Who knows? Drop a comment with which character you want to see run the Gauntlet next. Stay milked, lads and ladies, and I'll see ya in the next video.